The safe door stood open like a confession. Heavy steel swung wide to reveal secrets worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. A child sat in the leather chair, legs dangling above imported Italian carpet, her fingers still tingling from touching the biometric scanner. 8 years old, and she had done the impossible. Bridget Archibald looked at the stacks of documents inside the vault with simple curiosity. She had not meant to cause trouble. The question had simply existed in her mind like an unsolved equation, and she could never leave equations unsolved. When adults said something was impossible, they usually meant they had not tried hard enough. The office around her spoke of wealth she could not fully comprehend. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city dressed in December darkness, lights twinkling 73 stories below, like earthbound stars. The desk before her was larger than her bedroom. The chair she sat in cost more than her father's monthly rent. She pulled out her notebook, worn and filled with her mother's handwriting on the first few pages. Formulas and encouragements, reminders that curiosity was never something to apologize for. The rest of the pages held Bridget's own sketches, circuits, and security systems. She had observed puzzles she collected the way other children collected dolls or baseball cards. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. Her father would be looking for her soon, worry creasing his face the way it always did when she wandered. She should go back. But the documents in the safe drew her attention, and Bridget had never been good at ignoring interesting things. She reached forward, careful not to disturb anything, and read the first page of a financial report. The numbers made patterns in her mind, connections forming faster than she could fully process. Something was wrong with the figures. Even at 8, even without formal training in corporate finance, she could see the discrepancies. Footsteps in the hallway outside made her freeze. 24 hours earlier, the story had been entirely different. 3 years before that moment, on a Tuesday that had started like any other Tuesday, Astrid Archibald kissed her husband goodbye at 7:15 in the morning. Clinton remembered the exact time because he had glanced at his watch, calculating whether he would make his 8 a.m. meeting at the corporate security firm where he worked. She had smiled at him, her eyes the same warm brown their daughter had inherited, and told him not to forget to pick up milk on the way home. He never got the chance to buy that milk. The call came at 2:37 p.m. while he was presenting a security system overhaul to a client in Boston. His phone vibrated against the conference table, and he ignored it, the first time professional instinct overriding everything else. The second time, something made him look. Unknown number. His stomach had dropped without knowing why. The police officer on the other end had been kind in that practiced way people develop when delivering the worst news imaginable. Traffic accident. Drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Madison and 5th. Impact on the driver's side. She died instantly, the officer assured him, as if instant death was somehow a comfort, as if the speed of loss made it hurt less. Clinton had stood up from the conference table, his legs moving without conscious thought, and walked out of the meeting without explanation. His colleagues later told him he had simply set down his presentation remote and left his face blank, the color draining from it, like water from a broken glass. The drive from Boston to New Haven stretched endless and impossible. Every red light felt like mockery. Every other car on the highway seemed to move in slow motion, while his mind raced forward, trying to outrun reality. Astrid could not be dead. They had plans. Bridget was only 5 years old. They were supposed to grow old together, supposed to watch their daughter graduate college, get married, give them grandchildren. The morgue had fluorescent lighting that made everything look unreal. They led him to a room that smelled of disinfectant and something else he could not name. When they pulled back the sheet, he saw her face peaceful in a way that felt like a lie. There was a bruise on her left temple, barely visible. That was all. She could have been sleeping, but she was not sleeping. Clinton had reached out to touch her hand, and the coldness of her skin confirmed what his mind still refused to accept. The warmth that had defined her, the energy that had filled their small apartment with life, was simply gone. Extinguished by a stranger's poor choice, by a drunk man who had walked away from the accident with nothing more than a broken collarbone. Bridget had been at her grandmother's house when it happened, Mercy in the form of a scheduled playdate. Clinton picked her up at 6 p.m. and his mother-in-law took one look at his face and knew. She had started crying before he said a word, her hands reaching for the door frame to steady herself. He had knelt down to Bridget's level, the small person who looked so much like Astrid, it physically hurt to meet her eyes. She was holding a drawing she had made, a picture of their family with the sun drawn in the corner like a bright yellow smile. The words would not come at first. How did you tell a 5-year-old that her mother was never coming home? How did you explain death to someone who had barely begun to understand life? Bridget had looked at his face, her child's intuition, reading things he had not yet said, and her small hand had reached up to touch his cheek where tears were falling without permission. Mama. She had asked one word containing a universe of question and fear. He had pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too large to come from someone so tiny. She had cried until she made herself sick, until there were no more tears, until exhaustion claimed her, and she fell asleep against his shoulder with her fingers twisted in his shirt. The funeral happened 3 days later under a sky that had no right to be so blue and clear. People said things that were meant to be comforting, but only highlighted the inadequacy of language in the face of grief. She was so young, you have each other, time heals all wounds. The cliches piled up like debris after a storm, and Clinton nodded at each one because it was easier than explaining that nothing anyone said would bring her back. Bridget had stood beside him at the graveside wearing a black dress her grandmother had bought because they had not owned anything appropriate for a funeral. No one should have to buy funeral clothes for a 5-year-old. She had not cried during the service. Instead, she had stared at the casket with an intensity that worried him, her mind already working to understand something that had no good explanation. Later, she would ask questions, scientific questions, mechanical questions. How did the accident happen? What angle of impact? How fast were the cars going? She was trying to make sense of chaos through data, looking for patterns that would make the senseless somehow comprehensible. Clinton had answered every question as honestly as he could, understanding that this was her way of processing grief. Some children cried, some grew quiet. His daughter turned tragedy into a puzzle to solve, and he loved her even more for it. The weeks after the funeral blurred together. He went back to work because bills did not stop for grief, but his heart was not in it anymore. The security systems he designed felt pointless. He was protecting buildings and data while failing to protect what actually mattered. He could not protect Astrid from a drunk driver, could not protect Bridget from losing her mother, could not protect himself from waking up every morning and remembering all over again that she was gone. His colleagues noticed his declining performance, the mistakes that crept into his work, the meetings he forgot, the presentations where he lost his train of thought mid-sentence. They were sympathetic at first, but sympathy had limits in the corporate world. By the 3rd month, his supervisor sat him down for a conversation about whether this was really the right place for him anymore. Clinton had looked around his office at the blueprints and security schemas, covering his walls at the certifications and awards that had once meant something, and realized he did not care about any of it. The only thing that mattered was the small girl who came home from kindergarten every day and asked when Mama was coming back, as if death was something temporary, something that could be reversed if you just waited long enough. He quit the following Monday. His supervisor tried to talk him out of it, offered him extended leave, reduced hours, anything to keep someone with his expertise on staff. But Clinton was done. Done with the corporate world. Done with long hours and business trips and missing bedtime because a client needed reassurance about firewall protocols. The plan had been simple, if financially precarious. He would take flexible work, temporary positions that let him be home when Bridget needed him. Event staffing paid better than people expected, especially at high-end venues. He could work parties and galas, serve champagne to people who would never notice him, and be home in time to make breakfast and walk Bridget to school. The career he had built for 15 years evaporated overnight, replaced by bow ties and serving trays, and learning to be invisible in rooms full of visible wealth. His friends from the security industry tried to stay in touch at first, but the gap between their worlds widened with each passing month. They were moving up, making names for themselves while he was serving hors d'oeuvres to their clients. He did not care. Every morning he woke Bridget up with pancakes. Every evening he helped her with homework, read her stories, tucked her into bed with the worn, stuffed elephant Astrid had bought when she was born. Every night he fell asleep alone in a bed that felt too large, but he had his daughter, and that was enough. Bridget had changed in the aftermath of loss. The bright, talkative child became quieter, more introspective. She started noticing things other children overlooked. Patterns, systems, the way things worked. Astrid had been a data analyst before Bridget was born, brilliant with numbers and logic, and it seemed their daughter had inherited more than just her eyes. She taught herself basic coding from library books, started solving math problems meant for children twice her age, asked questions about security systems and encryption that made Clinton realize she had been paying attention all those years when he talked about his work. He bought her puzzle books to keep her occupied. Simple ones at first, then increasingly complex as she burned through them with startling speed. She would sit for hours working through logic problems, her face scrunched in concentration, and for those hours she seemed almost happy. The grief never left either of them. It just changed shape over time from sharp and cutting to a dull ache that lived in their bones. Bridget stopped asking when Mama was coming back and started asking what Mama would want them to do. Would Mama want us to be sad forever? Would Mama want me to give up on this puzzle? Would Mama be proud if I learned this? Clinton always answered the same way: Mama would want you to live fully, to be curious, to never stop asking questions. And Bridget would nod satisfied and return to whatever had captured her attention. 3 years passed. They built a life from the wreckage. Small, but sturdy. Father and daughter against a world that did not slow down for grief. And if Clinton sometimes felt the walls closing in, if he sometimes lay awake calculating how many more years of serving canapes it would take to afford Bridget's college education, he never let her see his worry. She was everything, the only thing. And he would serve 1,000 tables, smile through 1,000 humiliations, endure whatever it took to give her the childhood Astrid would have wanted for her. The morning of the Harrington Tower Christmas Gala began for Constance Harrington at 5:47 a.m. when her phone's alarm pulled her from dreams she never remembered. She silenced it before the second chime, a practiced motion that required no conscious thought. Her penthouse bedroom lay in darkness, broken only by the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. She did not believe in easing into the day. Constance rose immediately, her feet finding slippers positioned exactly where she left them each night. The marble floor was cold despite the building's heating system, a reminder that some discomforts persisted regardless of wealth. 45 minutes of exercise followed a routine as unvarying as sunrise. Treadmill for cardiovascular conditioning, weights for strength, stretching to maintain flexibility. Her personal gym occupied a corner of the penthouse with views that most people would find distracting, but Constance had long ago stopped noticing the beauty outside her windows. The city was simply where she worked, where she lived, where she had built an empire from her family's foundation. At 33, she had everything the world told women they should want: money, power, independence. Her reflection in the gym's mirrored wall showed a woman who looked exactly as she intended to look. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Face free of makeup this early, revealing the small scar near her left eyebrow from a skiing accident at 15. Body maintained through discipline rather than vanity, every muscle earned through repetition and refusal to accept weakness. Her eyes were what people noticed first. Pale blue, almost gray in certain lights, cold enough to make men who tried to charm her reconsider their approach. She had learned early that warmth was weaponized against women in business, turned into softness, made into a target. Shower, coffee, news briefing on her tablet while eating overnight oats prepared by her housekeeper the night before. Constance consumed information the way other people consumed air, necessary and constant. Financial markets, competitor movements, political developments that might impact her company, industry analysis. By 7 a.m., she had processed more data than most people encountered in a week. Her first meeting was at 8:30 with a vendor trying to renegotiate a contract they had signed 6 months earlier. They arrived in her office with presentations and charm, two men in expensive suits who clearly believed their smiles would smooth over their attempt to extract more money. Constance let them present for exactly 12 minutes before cutting them off mid-sentence. Your proposal amounts to a 47% increase in cost for services you contractually agreed to provide at the current rate. The contract contains no provisions for renegotiation before the 18-month mark. We are currently at month 6. The older of the two men, silver-haired and practiced in negotiation, leaned forward with the expression of someone about to make a reasonable argument. Ms. Harrington, certainly you understand that market conditions have changed since we signed in. Market conditions changed in your favor. She interrupted, her voice maintaining the same even temperature as before. Your raw material costs decreased by 11% in the past quarter. Labor costs in your sector remain flat. The only variable that changed is your desire to increase profit margins at my company's expense. The younger associate shifted in his seat, his confidence evaporating. The older man tried a different approach, something between cajoling and subtle threat. We have other clients who value partnership over rigid adherence to, then service those clients, Constance said, standing to indicate the meeting's end. My legal team will expect your compliance with existing contract terms by end of business tomorrow. If you choose to breach, we will pursue damages. Your choice. They left with significantly less swagger than they had arrived with. Constance returned to her desk and made a note to have her procurement team identify alternative vendors. Trust once broken was not worth repairing. Her second meeting at 10 a.m. involved her executive team reviewing Q4 performance. 12 people sat around the conference table, each representing a division of Harrington Industries. Most were men older than her, hired by her father during his tenure as CEO. They had been skeptical when she took over 3 years ago, their doubts thinly veiled behind professional courtesy. She had proven them wrong by doubling revenue and tripling stock price. Skepticism had evolved into respect, or at least into silence that resembled it. Silas Dermott sat 3 seats to her right, his expression attentive as the CFO presented financial projections. At 42, he was handsome in a way that required effort to maintain his suits tailored to disguise a frame that was beginning to thicken despite regular gym sessions. His dark hair showed silver at the temples, distinguished rather than aging. He smiled frequently during meetings, a practiced expression that never quite reached his eyes. Constance had worked with him for 5 years, trusted him with the company's financial operations, valued his strategic thinking. He was competent, ambitious, in appropriate measure, professional in all interactions. If something about him occasionally made her uncomfortable, some instinct that whispered warnings she could not articulate, she dismissed it as paranoia born from too many betrayals. The CFO finished his presentation with projections that showed continued growth barring unforeseen market disruptions. Department heads nodded approval. Silas suggested minor adjustments to investment strategies that made logical sense. The meeting concluded on schedule at 11:30. As people filed out, Silas lingered near the door. The Christmas gala tonight, he said, his tone casual. I assume preparations are finalized. My assistant confirmed everything this morning. Good. These events matter more than people realize. Relationships built over champagne lead to contracts signed in boardrooms. Constance recognized the truth in his words, even as she found herself irritated by his stating the obvious. She nodded dismissal, and he left with that professional smile still in place. Her father arrived for lunch at noon sharp, his punctuality one of the few traits they shared. William Harrington was 71, but moved like a man determined to deny time's effects. White hair cut military short, posture that spoke of decades giving orders and expecting obedience. He wore suits the way soldiers wore uniforms, armor, against a world that had tried repeatedly to defeat him and failed every time. They ate in her private dining room catered by the building's restaurant with food neither of them tasted, too focused on conversation that was really negotiation by other means. The Peterson account. William began cutting his steak with precision. You underpriced the bid. I priced it to win the contract and establish a relationship that will generate revenue for the next decade. Short-term thinking. You could have extracted another 12% and risked losing to a competitor willing to bid lower. Peterson's company is positioned to dominate their market segment. I want them dependent on our services when they do. William chewed thoughtfully, his pale blue eyes so like her own, assessing whether she was right or simply stubborn. You think like your mother sometimes, he said finally. It was the closest he came to compliments. Her mother, Eleanor Harrington, had died when Constance was 17, and William had never recovered from losing her. He had loved his wife with an intensity that frightened Constance because it proved that even the strongest men could be destroyed by loss. Mother would have bid even lower, Constance replied. She understood that loyalty bought at fair price lasts longer than profit extracted through leverage. Your mother was too soft for this business. It's why I handled negotiations and she handled operations. The old argument worn smooth by repetition. William believed emotion was weakness. Constance had spent her teenage year watching him prove that emotional shutdown was its own form of weakness, a different kind, but equally destructive. The gala tonight, she said, changing subjects before they fell into familiar patterns of disagreement. You're attending briefly. I have dinner with Senator Michaels at 9. Political favor trading. Investment in future infrastructure projects. The senator sits on committees that determine which companies receive contracts. Relationships matter. He was teaching her still, even though she had run the company successfully for 3 years. Some part of him would never stop seeing her as the daughter who needed guidance rather than the CEO who had exceeded his own achievements. They finished lunch in relative silence, comfortable in the way of two people who had long ago exhausted most topics of conversation. William left at 1:15, his driver waiting in the private garage beneath the building. Alone again, Constance returned to her desk and worked through the afternoon with focused intensity. Contract reviews, strategic planning for new market expansion, emails that ranged from crucial to banal. She answered them all with the same attention to detail because small oversights led to large disasters. At 4 p.m., her assistant brought the final guest list for the evening's gala. 372 names representing wealth, power, and influence across a dozen industries. Politicians and bankers, investors and entrepreneurs, old money and new. All of them coming to Harrington Tower to drink expensive champagne and pretend they enjoyed each other's company while really calculating angles and opportunities. Constance scanned the list with practiced efficiency, noting who was attending and who had declined. The declines told stories, competitors who did not want to give her intelligence by appearing at her event, former business associates who had burned bridges, social climbers who had not yet climbed high enough to receive invitations. She approved the list and turned her attention to preparation. Hair and makeup would arrive at 5:30, dress already selected and hanging in her dressing room, jewelry chosen for maximum impact with minimum ostentation. Every detail planned because leaving things to chance was how empires crumbled. The afternoon light shifted across her office winter sun, painting the walls gold, then amber, then fading to dusk. The city below began its transformation from day to night, millions of lights switching on, as if responding to a conductor's baton. It should have been beautiful. Constance registered it as data. Sunset at 4:39 p.m., temperature dropping to 28 degrees. Snow forecast for later in the evening. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Don't stay at the gala too late. These events are performance, not pleasure. Remember that. She did not reply. Everything with William Harrington was performance. Even lunch with his daughter. Perhaps especially that. Clinton Archibald woke at 6:15 a.m. to the sound of his daughter's feet padding across the apartment's hardwood floor. Bridget was an early riser, a trait inherited from her mother, and she moved through mornings with quiet purpose that belied her age. He found her in the kitchen, standing on the step stool they kept by the counter, attempting to reach the box of cereal on the top shelf. Her hair was tangled from sleep, wearing the same pajamas covered in stars and planets that had been her favorite for 6 months. She would wear them until they fell apart, another trait inherited from Astrid, the stubborn attachment to things that brought comfort. Let me help with that, he said, his voice still rough with sleep. She accepted his assistance without comment, watching as he poured cereal and milk into her bowl. They had a rhythm to their morning's patterns established over 3 years of being just the two of them. Breakfast, getting dressed, packing her backpack with homework and the notebook she carried everywhere. Clinton made coffee and scrambled eggs while Bridget ate her cereal, lost in a book about circuit design she had checked out from the library. 8 years old and reading material meant for high school students, but the librarian had stopped questioning her choices after Bridget explained quantum mechanics to her with the patience of someone teaching a slow learner. Mrs. Peterson is doing fractions today, Bridget announced between bites of cereal. I finished the whole unit last night. It's not that hard once you understand that fractions are just division written differently. Did you show your work like she asked? Yes, but it feels silly. If I can do the math in my head, writing it all out is just wasting time. Clinton sat beside her with his coffee, recognizing his daughter's eternal struggle with patience. Mrs. Peterson needs to see how you're thinking. It helps her know you understand the process, not just the answer. Bridget considered this, her face scrunching in thought. Mama used to say that showing your work was like leaving breadcrumbs so other people could follow your path. The mention of Astrid still caught Clinton off guard, sometimes even after 3 years. Bridget talked about her mother easily, casually weaving memories into everyday conversation, as if keeping Astrid alive through words. Mama was right. He managed his throat suddenly tight. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Bridget returned to her book while Clinton washed dishes, the domestic routine anchoring them both. Outside their window, New Haven was waking up the city, stretching and yawning into December cold. At 7:30, they bundled into winter coats and walked the 4 blocks to Bridget's school. She held his hand for the first 2 blocks, then let go as they approached the building, her independence asserting itself. 8 years old and already growing away from him in small increments that he both cherished and mourned. Other parents moved through the drop-off chaos, most of them hurrying with the distracted urgency of people late for somewhere else. Clinton recognized a few faces, had exchanged pleasantries with some, but he had never quite penetrated the social circles of parents who belonged to the same income brackets and social classes. He was the single father who worked irregular hours, the one whose daughter was brilliant but different, the one whose tragedy had marked him in ways that made others uncomfortable. Bridget's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, waited by the classroom door, greeting students with practiced cheerfulness. She was young, probably late 20s, with the idealistic energy of someone who still believed education could change lives. She smiled when she saw Bridget. "Good morning, Bridget. Are you ready for our fraction lesson?" "I already finished the whole unit," Bridget replied with the blunt honesty of a child who had not yet learned to soften truth for social comfort. "But I'll work on the practice problems quietly while the other students catch up." Mrs. Peterson's smile acquired a slight strain. Clinton intervened before his daughter's intelligence could further complicate the situation. "We're working on patience," he said, a quiet apology embedded in the words. "Bridget is remarkably gifted," Mrs. Peterson replied, using the same careful tone people employed when discussing children who did not fit standard categories. "We're doing our best to keep her challenged." They both knew it was not enough. The school had tested Bridget twice and suggested she skip a grade, but Clinton had resisted. She was already the youngest in her class, already different in ways that isolated her. Putting her with even older children seemed cruel, even if academically appropriate. He kissed Bridget's forehead, reminded her to be kind to other students during the fraction lesson, and watched her disappear into the classroom with her backpack full of books that would bore her and puzzles that would not. The walk back to their apartment felt longer alone. Clinton had 4 hours before he needed to be at Harrington Tower for party setup. 4 hours to fill with job searching and bill paying and all the mundane maintenance of a life that never quite generated enough income. He stopped at the diner 2 blocks from home, a place that knew him well enough to have his coffee poured before he reached the counter. Frank, the owner, was 60-something, with hands scarred from decades of cooking and a face that had seen every kind of human drama. "You look tired, Clinton." "Working the Harrington Gala tonight, late shift." Frank nodded, understanding. He had worked enough catering jobs in his youth to know the exhaustion of serving people who would never notice your existence. "They tip well at those things." "Not really, but it pays 50 an hour for 5 hours, plus overtime. Bridget needs new winter boots, and the heating bill is due." The economics of survival, calculated in boots and utilities, and hours stood on feet that already hurt. Frank refilled his coffee without asking, a small kindness that Clinton accepted with gratitude. He spent the morning at the library updating his resume and sending applications to security firms that probably would not call back. 3 years out of the industry was an eternity in technology. His certifications were outdated. His references were people who had stopped returning calls. He was 36 and already obsolete in the field where he had once excelled. The bitter truth was that he had made a choice, and choices had consequences. He could have kept his career, hired nannies to raise. Bridget maintained his trajectory towards senior positions and comfortable income. Instead, he had chosen morning pancakes and homework help and being there when his daughter woke from nightmares about the mother she could barely remember. He did not regret it, would make the same choice again. But the weight of it pressed down some mornings, the knowledge that he had traded one kind of future for another, and the uncertainty of whether that trade would prove wise in the long term. Lunch was a sandwich from the convenience store eaten while walking because time was currency he could not afford to waste. At 1 p.m., he picked Bridget up from school, finding her waiting by the front doors with her backpack and an expression of barely suppressed excitement. "I have something to show you," she announced, pulling him toward a bench away from other parents and students. She extracted her notebook and opened to a page covered in sketches and annotations. Circuit diagrams, security schematics, mathematical formulas that Clinton recognized from his years in the industry. "Where did you get this?" "I made it. Mrs. Peterson was talking about addition and fractions, and I was bored, so I started designing a security system for the school. It has 3 vulnerability points that could be exploited with basic tools. But if you repositioned 2 cameras and added a redundant sensor to the main entrance, the entire building would be significantly more secure. Clinton stared at his 8-year-old daughter, pride and concern warring in his chest. She was brilliant, exceptionally so. But brilliance in children was complicated, especially when directed toward topics that made adults uncomfortable. This is impressive work, sweetheart, really impressive. But maybe we should keep it between us for now. Bridget's face fell slightly. Because people think it's weird when kids know about security systems. Because people don't always understand, and I do not want your teachers thinking you're learning unsafe things. She closed the notebook, disappointment clear in her posture. Clinton knelt to her level, his hands on her small shoulders. Listen to me, your mother was brilliant too, and people didn't always understand her either. Being different isn't wrong. Being smarter than people expect isn't something to hide. But it's also okay to be careful about who sees what you can do. Does that make sense? Bridget nodded slowly, her mind already processing the politics of being exceptional in a world designed for average. They walked home together, her hand in his, and Clinton felt the familiar ache of inadequacy. Bridget deserved better schools, gifted programs, opportunities that required money he did not have. She deserved a mother who could have taught her all the things Astrid had known about data and systems and navigating the world as a brilliant woman. Instead, she had him doing his best, hoping it would be enough. At 3 p.m., he made her an early dinner, macaroni and cheese from a box because it was cheap, and she would actually eat it without complaint. She did homework at the kitchen table while he showered and dressed in the slightly worn tuxedo that was his uniform for high-end events. His mother-in-law, Doris, arrived at 4:30 to watch Bridget for the evening. She was 68, still sharp despite her grief, and she loved Bridget with fierce protectiveness that sometimes worried Clinton. Doris had lost her only child. She could not lose her granddaughter to anything, not even to normal childhood risks. The homework's done, Clinton reported. She can have 1 hour of screen time, then reading before bed at 8. I know the routine, Clinton, Doris said, not unkindly. She reached up to adjust his bow tie, which he had tied slightly crooked. You look handsome. Astrid would have liked seeing you dressed up. The mention of his dead wife from her mother should have felt painful, but Doris spoke of Astrid, easily keeping her present through words. Clinton had learned to do the same for Bridget's sake, if not his own. Be good for Grandma, he told Bridget, kissing the top of her head. Can I bring my backpack to the party? She asked suddenly. You said I could come for the first hour. Remember? Before it gets too late. He had promised weeks ago that she could see the famous Harrington Tower. Bridget had been researching the building's architecture and security systems, fascinated by its reputation as one of the most secure structures in the city. 1 hour, he agreed. You stay with me, don't wander off, and Grandma will take you home at 7. Deal. Deal. He arrived at Harrington Tower at 5 p.m. using the service entrance that employees and vendors accessed. The building soared above him, 73 floors of steel and glass reflecting the winter sky. Impressive if you had never seen it before. Just another workplace if you had served enough wealthy people in enough expensive buildings. The banquet manager, a thin woman named Patricia, who ran events with military efficiency, assigned him to the main ballroom with instructions to circulate, offer champagne, clear, empty glasses, and remain invisible unless directly addressed. The guests arrive at 7, she reminded the assembled servers. You arrive at 6:30 to the floor, not before. The Harrington family prefers staff to be absent until needed. Understood. 15 servers nodded understanding. Clinton had worked enough of these events to know the unstated message: we exist to serve, but must pretend not to exist until service is required. The cognitive dissonance that wealthy people demanded from those beneath them, the simultaneous need to be waited on, and to believe they lived in a world where such service was simply ambient magic rather than human labor. The hour before guest arrival was spent in the industrial kitchen, reviewing floor plans and assignments. Clinton was given Section 3, the area near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Prime real estate for guests who wanted to be seen against the glittering backdrop of New Haven. Bridget arrived at 6:45, with Doris wide-eyed at the building's opulence, even from the service areas. Clinton brought them through a back corridor to the ballroom during the brief window when staff was finalizing setups, but guests had not yet arrived. His daughter stood in the center of the vast space, turning slowly to take in everything. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than their annual rent, ice sculptures melting slowly on tables laden with food, the technological infrastructure embedded in every corner, camera sensors, access panels disguised as decorative elements. Her eyes tracked each security camera, noting placement and coverage angles. She observed the electronic locks on doors leading to restricted areas. Her brilliant mind was mapping the building's defensive systems with the same focus other children brought to video games. "It's beautiful," she said, but Clinton knew she meant the systems, not the decor. 30 minutes, then Grandma takes you home, he reminded her. "You can sit in that chair by the kitchen entrance. Quiet and invisible. Okay." "Okay, Daddy." Doris settled into a chair nearby, her knitting already emerging from her oversized purse. Bridget pulled out her notebook and began sketching, her pencil moving with practiced speed as she committed the ballroom's layout to paper. The first guests arrived at 7:03, fashionably late enough to make an entrance, but not so late as to seem rude. They moved through the space with the comfortable entitlement of people who belonged in rooms like this. Designer dresses and tailored suits, jewelry that represented down payments on houses, laughter that sounded practiced as if genuine joy was something they had forgotten how to access. Clinton moved among them with his tray of champagne, offering drinks with the neutral pleasantness that made him forgettable. Some guests took glasses without acknowledging him. Others said thank you with the automatic politeness of people who had been taught manners but did not invest them with meaning. Constance Harrington entered at 7:30 and the room's energy shifted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked her movement. She wore an emerald dress that probably cost more than Clinton's car, her platinum hair falling in perfect waves that looked effortless, but certainly were not. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, stopping to greet important guests, laughing at jokes that probably were not funny, playing the role of gracious host with the skill of someone who had been performing since childhood. Clinton watched her from his position near the windows, recognizing something in her careful control. She was brilliant at this, at the social choreography of wealth and power. But there was something brittle in the way she held herself, as if she was armored against her own party. Silas Dermott appeared at her elbow, leaning in to say something that made her smile. The smile did not reach her eyes. Clinton noticed and wondered if anyone else did, or if they were all too busy performing their own roles to notice each other's. The evening progressed with clockwork precision. Champagne flowed. Canapés disappeared from silver trays. Conversations rose and fell like music. Clinton circulated through Section 3, collecting empty glasses and offering fresh drinks, his feet already aching in dress shoes that had never quite fit properly. At 8:15, he checked on Bridget and found her still sketching, her focus absolute. Doris had fallen asleep in her chair, the gentle breathing of the elderly. He should send them home. But Bridget looked up with such excitement in her eyes, such pleasure in being allowed to observe this world, that he gave her another 15 minutes. "Just a little longer, sweetheart. Then Grandma will take you home, and you can tell me all about what you noticed." "I noticed 17 different security vulnerabilities," she whispered, "but also 6 really clever solutions to problems most buildings have. Whoever designed this system was smart. Pride and concern, again the twin emotions that define parenting a genius child." Near the bar, a group of men in expensive suits had gathered, their voices carrying across the marble floor. Clinton moved closer, prepared to offer refills, when he caught fragments of their conversation. They were mocking one of the other servers, a young man named Marcus, who had accidentally spilled champagne on a guest's dress. The woman had been gracious about it, but the men were not. Their laughter had sharp edges, cruelty dressed up as humor. "That's the problem with hiring help off the street," one of them said, diamond cufflinks catching the light as he gestured dismissively. "No breeding, no training, no class. Just desperate people pretending they belong in civilized society." Clinton's jaw tightened. He had heard variations of this sentiment before, the casual contempt wealthy people deployed toward those who served them. It never stopped stinging, the reminder that his humanity was conditional, visible only when he made mistakes, but invisible when he performed correctly. Another man joined the laughter, his face red from alcohol. "I heard Harrington hired some of these people from homeless shelters. Charitable work, I suppose, but it lowers the tone when you have to worry about your servers stealing the silverware." Clinton moved away before he did something regrettable, like informing them that Marcus had a degree in hospitality management and was working 3 jobs to support his disabled mother. Before he explained that most of the servers in this room had stories that would make their comfortable lives seem hollow by comparison. Bridget appeared at his elbow, small and solemn, holding a wrapped half sandwich. "You haven't eaten anything all night," she whispered. "I saved you half of mine." His heart cracked open with love for this small person who took care of him when he was supposed to be taking care of her. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll eat it on my break." But there would be no break. The event was scheduled until midnight, and servers were expected to maintain presence throughout. Clinton pocketed the sandwich and checked his watch. 8:45. Doris needed to take Bridget home soon before his daughter's tiredness made her vulnerable to the casual cruelties happening around them. The group at the bar had shifted their mockery. Now they were discussing Clinton himself, their voices still carrying with the careless volume of people who had never needed to worry about being overheard. "Must be nice," one said, "getting paid to serve people who actually matter. Probably the closest he'll ever get to success standing in the same room with it." Another laughed the sound like breaking glass. "I wonder what he did to end up here." Failed business divorce. You don't go from having real work to serving champagne unless life took a wrong turn somewhere. Clinton's face remained carefully blank, years of practice controlling his expression. He had learned early in this work that reacting gave them power. Silence was safer than defending yourself to people who had already decided you were beneath consideration. But Constance Harrington had turned at the sound of their voices. She stood near the window, and Clinton saw the exact moment she registered what was happening. Her pale blue eyes tracked from the laughing men to Clinton, standing there with his tray, his daughter beside him with small fists clenched. Something crossed her face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. For a moment, she looked young and uncertain, vulnerable, in a way that contradicted everything about her carefully constructed presence. Then she moved, crossing the ballroom in 5 precise steps, her heels clicking against marble like a declaration of intent. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through their laughter like a blade through silk, "I find your conversation tedious and your manners appalling." The group fell silent, shocked by the CEO's sudden intervention. One of the men, older and clearly more senior than the others, tried to recover with a practiced smile. "Ms. Harrington, I know exactly what you were doing. You were demonstrating that wealth and status do not guarantee character or basic human decency." She turned to Clinton, and for the first time all evening, she really looked at him. Not through him, at him. He saw her notice the competence in the way he held himself, the exhaustion that spoke of too many double shifts, the small child beside him radiating protective fury. Constance operated on impulse, driven by anger at the cruelty she had witnessed and a reckless desire to humiliate the men who thought wealth made them superior. She wanted to shock them, wanted to prove that power came in forms they did not recognize. The words emerged before she fully thought them through, before she considered consequences, before caution could intervene. "Open the safe in my office, and I'll marry you." Her voice carried across the ballroom, clear and confident, and for one heartbeat, the entire room went silent. Then laughter erupted, wave after wave of it rolling through the crowd like a living thing. Everyone knew the Harrington Tower executive safe was legendary, protected by military-grade encryption and biometric locks. Impossible to crack without months of planning and expertise most people did not possess. It was the perfect joke. Absurd enough to be harmless. Impossible enough to make the original cruel men look foolish for their pettiness. Clinton's face flushed, caught between gratitude for her intervention and shame at being made into a spectacle. He was being defended and humiliated, simultaneously rescued and reduced to a punchline in the same breath. He nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement that she might have been trying to help even if the execution had failed. Then he returned to his work, moving through the crowd with his tray, his face carefully blank once more. But Bridget did not laugh. She stood very still, watching Constance Harrington walk away. Watched her pull out her phone and input a code that dimmed the lights in a specific pattern: 1 long press, 3 short, 2 long, 4 short. Watched her take a sip from a crystal glass and set it down on a nearby table, leaving perfect fingerprints on the surface. Bridget's mind, always working, always solving puzzles, began to turn. The party continued, Music played, conversations resumed. The moment passed into the evening's background noise, forgotten by everyone except the few people it had actually touched. Clinton sent Bridget and Doris home at 9, kissing his daughter goodbye and reminding her to brush her teeth and go straight to bed. Doris promised to text when they arrived safely, her warm hand squeezing his arm in silent support. He worked until midnight, his feet screaming, his back aching, his smile holding, even as exhaustion pulled at every muscle. The guests drifted away slowly, most drunk enough to be careless about goodbye, a few sober enough to thank the event staff in tones that suggested they had just remembered the servers were human. Constance Harrington remained until the end, as protocol demanded. She moved through the final hour with the same controlled grace she had maintained all evening, thanking departing guests, accepting compliments on the event's success, playing her role perfectly. At 12:15 a.m., with the last guest finally gone, she kicked off her heels and stood in the empty ballroom in bare feet. The staff was cleaning, moving efficiently through the space to erase evidence of the evening. Ice sculptures had melted into abstract shapes. Champagne glasses covered every surface. The detritus of wealth and celebration scattered like evidence of some beautiful crime. Clinton was stacking chairs near the service entrance when she approached. Up close, he saw that her eyes were tired despite her makeup, that tiny lines of tension bracketed her mouth. "I apologize for earlier," she said. "Using you to make a point was inappropriate." Her voice was different from the one she had used during the party. Less performed, more real. "You were defending me," Clinton replied. "I haven't had anyone do that in a long time." Something passed between them, brief and fragile. Recognition maybe of two people playing roles they had not chosen but could not escape. Then she was gone, heels in hand, moving toward the private elevator that would carry her to the penthouse suite, 73 floors above the mess and noise and human complication. Clinton finished his shift at 1 a.m. The banquet manager handed him an envelope with his payment, 5 hours at $50 an hour, plus overtime minus taxes. $283 that would go toward Bridget's boots and the heating bill, and the slow accumulation of survival. He rode the subway home, too tired to notice the other late-night travelers, his feet throbbing in shoes that had never fit right. The apartment was dark when he arrived, except for the nightlight in Bridget's room, that she still needed the small accommodation to fear that she would never admit to feeling. He checked on her, finding her asleep with her notebook open beside her pillow pencil still in hand. She had fallen asleep mid-sketch, drawing something that looked like technical schematics. He carefully removed the notebook, turned off her bedside lamp, and pulled her blanket up to her chin. She stirred slightly. "Daddy, go back to sleep, sweetheart." "I figured something out," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "About the safe. You can tell me in the morning." But she was already asleep again, her breathing evening out into the gentle rhythm of childhood rest. Clinton stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching his daughter sleep, thinking about Astrid and what she would make of their lives now. Would she be proud? Disappointed? Would she have made different choices, better ones? Choices that would not have landed them in a small apartment with not quite enough money and too much weight on shoulders too young to carry it. He would never know. The dead kept their counsel, left the living to stumble forward with incomplete information and hearts that never fully healed. He fell asleep at 2 a.m., still wearing his dress shirt and pants, too exhausted to properly undress. His dreams were fragmented and strange, filled with safes that opened and closed doors that led nowhere. Voices calling his name from distances he could not calculate. Somewhere in the Harrington Tower executive suite, Constance Harrington stood at her window looking out at the city. She was still wearing her emerald dress, still wearing the armor of perfection, even though the party had ended hours ago. Sleep would not come. Her mind replayed the evening, analyzing conversations and connections made, calculating the social and business capital accumulated through 5 hours of controlled performance. But she kept returning to the moment with the servers. The casual cruelty of men who had everything except awareness of their own smallness. The single father standing there with careful dignity while being mocked. The small girl with fierce eyes who had noticed everything. The ridiculous challenge she had issued. "Open the safe and I'll marry you." Impossible, of course. The safe was protected by systems that had cost millions to install. Date codes that changed weekly. Biometric scanners calibrated to her specific physiological markers. Voice recognition tuned to her frequency range and speech patterns. She had made the challenge because it was safe to make impossible to fulfill. A joke that harmed no one because it could never be taken seriously. Constance turned from the window and finally removed her dress, hanging it carefully before washing away the evening's makeup. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked exactly as she had been designed to look: successful, powerful, controlled, empty. She was 33 years old and had everything except the things that could not be purchased or negotiated or controlled through careful strategy. At 3 a.m., she finally fell asleep alone in a bed built for two, in a penthouse designed for a life she did not have. 73 floors below in the executive suite she had vacated hours earlier, motion sensors detected movement in the hallway. The security system logged the event but sent no alert. The movement was coded as authorized personnel, someone with access credentials that bypass standard restrictions. A figure approached the office door, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. The lock disengaged without resistance. The office remained dark except for ambient city light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. The figure moved directly to the safe embedded in the wall behind Constance's desk. From a pocket emerged a tablet displaying code sequences and access protocols. Fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, someone who had done this before, who had planned for this moment. But the safe did not open. The date code had been changed 3 hours earlier, a routine update Constance performed randomly to prevent pattern recognition. The figure tried again, running through alternate sequences, variations on themes that should have worked. Still locked. A low curse broke the silence. The figure photographed the safe's interface with the tablet, capturing every detail for later analysis, then disappeared as quickly as they had arrived, the office door closing with a soft click that the security system logged and ignored. In her bed, 73 floors above, Constance slept without dreaming, unaware that someone had just attempted to breach her most secure system. In his apartment across the city, Clinton shifted in uneasy sleep, his subconscious processing the evening's humiliations in fragments he would not remember upon waking. And in her small bedroom with the nightlight still glowing, Bridget Archibald dreamed of circuits and codes of locks clicking open like questions finally answered, of doing something impossible, simply because everyone said it could not be done. Her notebook lay on the nightstand where her father had placed it. Inside were sketches of Harrington Towers' security systems, detailed enough to show every camera placement and access point, detailed enough to map the path from public areas to restricted spaces, detailed enough to show that an 8-year-old girl, with her mother's brilliance and her father's careful observation, had spent 1 hour absorbing information that would take most adults weeks to compile. The city settled into its deepest sleep, the hours between night and morning, when even New York's energy dimmed to something almost peaceful. Streets emptied, buildings darkened. The only movement was essential workers and those who lived in the margins. The cleaning crews and night security and people whose lives operated on schedules the daylight world never noticed. At 5:47 a.m., Constance Harrington's alarm would sound again. Clinton Archibald would wake to make pancakes. Bridget would wake with her mind already running through the puzzles she had collected the night before, pieces arranging themselves into patterns that adults would not recognize as dangerous until far too late. The safe in Constance's office remained locked, its secrets protected by systems designed to be impenetrable. But nothing was truly impenetrable. Every system had vulnerabilities. Every lock had a key, even if that key existed in unconventional forms. A child's observation, a mother's legacy, a father's sacrifice, a CEO's careless challenge. All the pieces were in place, though no one knew it yet. The story had been set in motion by 1,000 small choices, none of them seeming significant in isolation. But that was how the impossible became possible. Not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but through the accumulation of small moments that aligned in ways no one could have predicted. The sun would rise in 93 minutes. Another day would begin. And sometime in the hours that followed, the safe that could not be opened would stand open, changed forever by a child who refused to accept that impossible meant anything more than a challenge waiting to be solved. The security alarm shattered silence at 9:47 p.m. with a sound designed to inspire panic. Red lights pulsed through corridors in patterns that sent guests who had lingered after the party scrambling toward exits. Security personnel abandoned their posts and rushed toward elevators, training overriding shock. Constance felt ice flood her veins before her mind caught up to what the alarm meant. The safe, her safe, the one protected by systems that had cost $3 million to install and were supposed to be impenetrable for at least another decade. She ran abandoning heels somewhere between the ballroom's wreckage and the elevator bay. The emerald dress that had cost $8,000 caught on something and tore. She did not care. Her heart hammered against ribs that suddenly felt too tight to contain it. The elevator ride to the 73rd floor took 48 seconds. Each one stretched into eternity while her mind raced through possibilities. Corporate espionage, terrorism, insider threat. Someone had accessed the most secure space in the building, breached defenses that were supposed to be military grade, penetrated layers of protection she had personally approved. Silas Dermott caught the same elevator, his expression arranged into concern, though his eyes were calculating behind the mask. William Harrington took the next car up, his face darkening with rage that made younger executives step back instinctively. The office door burst open under the force of security guards who had weapons drawn and faces set for confrontation. Then they stopped, confused by what they found. A child sat in the CEO's chair, small enough that her feet dangled above carpet that cost more per square foot than most people spent on rent. She looked at the assembled adults with interest rather than fear, her head tilted slightly, as if they were the puzzle she was solving. The safe behind Constance's desk stood open. Its heavy door swung wide to reveal the private heart of the Harrington financial empire. Documents that represented billions in assets, contracts that could shift markets, information that rival companies would kill to possess. All of it exposed because an 8-year-old girl had been curious. Clinton arrived moments later, pushing past security with terror, making his movements clumsy. He saw his daughter sitting calmly in a chair worth more than his car and felt his world tilt sideways. His voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as his own. "Bridget, oh God, Bridget, what did you do?" She turned to him with the patient expression of someone who had expected this reaction and prepared for it. "I opened it. I wanted to see if what the lady said was true." Constance stared at the open safe, then at the child, then at the father whose face had gone pale enough to suggest imminent collapse. Her mind, trained to process crisis with clinical efficiency, could not make sense of the scene before her. The question emerged as barely a whisper. "How?" Bridget began to explain, her voice taking on the tone of someone teaching adults concepts they should understand, but somehow did not. She walked them through each step with methodical precision. The light code she had observed Constance input on her phone during the party, translating it into a date pattern that she had tested against logical possibilities. The fingerprint obtained from a champagne glass, photographed and traced onto polymer film, she carried in her backpack for science experiments. The voice modulation achieved by studying 17 recorded speeches until she could mimic frequency and cadence well enough to fool automated systems. Security guards exchanged glances that ranged from disbelief to grudging admiration. William Harrington looked like he might explode, his face cycling through shades of red that suggested dangerous blood pressure spikes. Silas Dermott's mind worked furiously behind eyes that revealed nothing, calculating implications and opportunities in the chaos. Constance felt her understanding of reality shift. This child had bypassed security systems designed by experts with decades of experience using observation, deduction, and materials that probably cost less than $20. Everything she had believed about protection and control had just been proven wrong by someone who could not legally drive a car. Clinton wanted the earth to open and swallow him. His hands shook as he reached for his daughter, apologies already forming on lips that had gone numb with shock. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what she was thinking. I'll pay for any damage. I'll work for free. Constance cut him off with a gesture, her focus still locked on Bridget. "You didn't learn this from your father, did you?" "No," Bridget replied simply. "Daddy used to do security work, but he quit after Mama died. He doesn't teach me lock stuff. I just like puzzles." The word mama hung in the air, a reminder that this brilliant child carried grief she was too young to fully process. Constance felt something crack in her chest, recognition of loss calling to loss across the divide of age and circumstance. She stood slowly, her mind moving past shock towards something more troubling. The date she had used for her primary access code. January 15th, 2003. Her mother's death date information almost no one in the company possessed. Her voice came out careful, controlled, despite the case in her thoughts. The date on my mother's death. How did you know that? Bridget's answer was immediate, confident. The flowers on your desk. The card was visible from where I sat earlier. It said, always remember January 15th, 2003. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Constance's words emerged slowly, each one carefully placed. I moved those flowers this morning. They weren't on my desk during the party. They were in my private bathroom. The implication hung heavy in sudden silence. Bridget's small face scrunched in confusion, certainty wavering. I saw them on your desk when I walked past your office earlier. The door was open for just a second when someone came out. The card was right there. Constance turned to her head of security, a former military officer whose competence she had never questioned until this moment. Pull the footage from my office for the past week. Now. They reconvened in the security control room 30 minutes later. Clinton stood with his hand on Bridget's shoulder, anchoring them both, while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Arrest, charges, his daughter's brilliance twisted into evidence of criminal intent. Everything they had built from the wreckage of Astrid's death collapsing because he had let her come to a party where she did not belong. The screen showed multiple angles of Constance's office timestamps scrolling backward through days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The previous Friday appeared, and the security chief froze the feed. A figure moved through the frame with purpose, someone who knew exactly where they were going. The footage glitched, pixels scattering into digital snow, then resumed with the figure gone and the camera angle subtly adjusted. A voice from the doorway made everyone turn. Someone hacked the feed. Flynn Corbin stood just inside the control room, his presence unremarkable enough that no one had noticed him arrive. He moved like someone trained to be forgettable, average height, and build features that slid away from memory the moment you stopped looking directly at them. But his eyes were sharp, cataloging details faster than most people could process them. Clinton recognized him immediately. They had worked together years ago before Astrid died, before everything changed. Flynn had been the one who could bypass any system solve, any problem disappear into any situation. Then he had gone deeper into shadows, doing work he could not discuss for clients who existed only in encrypted files. Flynn crossed to the console and pointed at the timestamp. See that 0.3 seconds missing? The human eye won't catch it, but the system log shows the discontinuity. They edited the footage to hide their presence. Constance felt cold understanding settle over her like a shroud. Someone accessed my office to study the safe. They've been planning this for weeks. But the safe wasn't opened until tonight, Silas interjected smoothly, his tone reasonable. Until this child proved it could be done. Flynn's gaze slid to Silas, something dangerous moving behind professional courtesy. Bridget only proved it was possible, which means someone else was planning to do it themselves. They needed to study the system, test vulnerabilities, wait for the right moment. William Harrington's voice cut through mounting tension like a blade. Who has motive to access our financial records? His eyes moved across the assembled executives, landing briefly on each face before continuing. But Constance caught the microscon pause when he looked at Silas Dermott, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her father's gaze that suggested suspicion he had not yet voiced. The next hours unfolded in tense investigation. Clinton was held for questioning his protestations of innocence, falling on ears trained to hear lies in every claim. Bridget refused to leave his side, her small presence a reminder of innocence in a situation growing darker with each revelation. Constance found herself believing the single father and his genius daughter, despite every instinct that told her to trust no one. Something in the way they looked at each other, the genuine terror in Clinton's eyes at the thought of his daughter in trouble, the fierce protectiveness in Bridget's posture when security suggested separating them for individual interviews. This was not calculated deception. This was love, pure and uncomplicated by the agendas that poison most relationships in Constance's world. Flynn pulled her aside in a corridor, away from the controlled chaos of the investigation. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper meant only for her ears. I've been tracking Silas Dermott for 6 months. Different client, different eyes, but the pattern is there. He's been embezzling funds through shell corporations, hiding evidence in encrypted files. If he could access your safe, he could plant documents that incriminate you instead of him. Constance's mind raced through implications connecting dots she had been willfully ignoring. Do you have proof? Not enough, not yet. But your father suspects something too, or he wouldn't have looked at Silas the way he did. A decision crystallized the kind that felt reckless but necessary. I'm taking Clinton and Bridget home with me. If Silas sees them as threats or loose ends, they're not safe in a hotel or their apartment. Flynn nodded approval. I'll keep digging. Watch your back, Constance. Desperate men do desperate things, and Silas has a lot to lose if this unravels. Constance's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of Harrington Tower, connected by a spiral staircase that looked like frozen art. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views that stretched to the horizon, the city spread out below like a map of lights and possibilities. Clinton stood in the entrance holding Bridget's hand, both of them overwhelmed by luxury they had only imagined from magazine spreads. The apartment was larger than their entire building. The furniture probably cost more than Clinton would earn in 5 years. Everything spoke of wealth so casual it became invisible to those who lived with it constantly. Constance's voice was firm, allowing no argument. You'll stay here until this is resolved. Guest rooms are on the 2nd level. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. I need to make some calls. She disappeared into her home office, leaving Clinton and Bridget standing in a space that felt like another planet. Bridget recovered first curiosity overriding intimidation. She moved through rooms with wide eyes, touching nothing but observing everything. The smart home integration, the security panels, the technology embedded in walls and surfaces that responded to voice commands and gesture controls. Clinton followed his daughter, watching her brilliant mind catalog and categorize already solving puzzles he could not see. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother-in-law. Everything okay? The news is saying something happened at the tower. He typed back, long story. We're safe, I'll explain tomorrow. The first night passed in awkward silence. Clinton could not sleep in a bed that probably cost more than his car sheets, with thread counts he had not known existed. He lay awake, staring at a ceiling that seemed impossibly far above him, listening to the city hum 73 floors below. In the adjacent room, Bridget slept fitfully, her dreams filled with codes and patterns, guilt beginning to creep in round the edges of her curiosity. She had not meant to cause trouble, had only wanted to solve the puzzle. But now her father looked worried in a way that made her stomach hurt, and the beautiful lady seemed angry even when she was being kind. The second day brought tentative conversation. Bridget, undaunted by wealth or status, began asking Constance questions about the building's security systems, about coding languages, about what it was like to run a company. Constance, surprised to find herself enjoying the child's curiosity, answered honestly. There was something refreshing about Bridget's directness. She asked questions without hidden agendas, absorbed information without trying to weaponize it, looked at Constance with interest rather than calculation. For the first time in years, Constance felt seen rather than assessed. Clinton tried to make himself useful, unable to simply accept hospitality without reciprocating somehow. He found his way to the kitchen, a space of marble and steel that probably intimidated professional chefs. He cooked meals that filled the sterile penthouse with warmth it had never known. Simple food, comfort food, the kind that spoke of homes rather than houses. Scrambled eggs and toast for breakfast. Chicken soup for lunch, made from a recipe Astrid had taught him, the smell triggering memories so sharp they felt like physical pain. Pasta with vegetables for dinner. Nothing fancy but made with care that elevated simple ingredients into something nourishing. Constance found herself drawn to the kitchen by smells she could not remember experiencing in this space. Her housekeeper prepared meals according to nutritionist-approved menus, carefully balanced and utterly joyless. This was different. This was someone cooking because food meant more than fuel. She watched Clinton move through her kitchen with quiet competence, his hands capable and sure. He cleaned as he went, organized, instinctively moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make the most of limited time and resources. On the third night, snow fell heavy and soft, blanketing the city in silence that felt almost sacred. Constance stood at the window, watching flakes swirl past when Clinton approached with 2 mugs of tea. His voice held apology and humor in equal measure. I made this wrong, didn't I? I have no idea what kind of tea you like. She accepted the mug, wrapping her hands around warmth that seeped through expensive porcelain. It's perfect. They stood together in comfortable silence, while the city disappeared under white. Finally, Constance spoke, her voice quieter than normal. I'm sorry for what I said at the party. It was cruel using you to make a point. Clinton's response was gentle understanding she had not earned but received anyway. You were defending me. I haven't had anyone do that in a long time. Your wife, Constance said, not quite a question. Bridget mentioned her. What happened? The story emerged slowly, Clinton's voice steady despite old grief that still had edges sharp enough to cut. Car accident, drunk driver, instant death that was supposed to be mercy, but felt like theft. Bridget at her grandmother's house, spared witnessing what no child should see. His decision to leave his career, to choose presence over advancement, to build a life from wreckage that made sense measured in pancakes and homework help, rather than promotions and prestige. Constance listened without interrupting, recognizing sacrifice when she heard it. This man had given up everything for his daughter, walked away from expertise and income and career trajectory because love mattered more than success. She envied that. The certainty, the willingness to burn your own ambitions if it meant keeping someone else warm. Her voice came out rougher than intended. You gave up your career for it. Clinton's answer was simple, absolute. I'd give up anything for her. She's everything. Something cracked in the walls. Constance had built a small fissure, letting in light she had not realized she needed. Her own voice surprised her with its honesty. I envy that. The certainty. I've never been certain about anything except business. You don't trust easily. The observation was gentle, no accusation in it. Constance felt herself responding before caution could intervene. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Clinton turned to face her fully, his brown eyes warm in the apartment's soft lighting. No, trust is a necessity. Without it, you're just surviving, not living. Their eyes met and something passed between them. Fragile and new, barely formed enough to name. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of something that could become understanding if given time and space to grow. Bridget appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair tangled and her pajamas wrinkled. She looked small and young in that moment, not like the genius who had cracked military-grade security, but like the child who still needed her father when nightmares woke her. Clinton scooped her up without hesitation. This man who could carry his daughter with one arm while holding tea with the other, multitasking parenthood with the ease of long practice. Constance watched them, father and daughter, and felt loneliness settle over her like a weight she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing its presence. She had everything, money and power and success that most people would never achieve. But she did not have this simple warmth, this uncomplicated love, this sense that someone would choose her over everything else without hesitation or condition. The moment broke when Constance's phone buzzed with an alert. She glanced at the screen and felt ice flood her veins again. Silas had made his move. Metrics Part 2 complete. Word count 3043 words. I need to continue to reach 5,000 words. Let me continue. Media outlets were running stories about the security breach, but the narrative had been twisted beyond recognition. Clinton's face appeared on screens across the city, identified as a former security expert who had trained his daughter to break into high-security facilities. Doctored video footage showed him near Constance's office at suspicious times, timestamps manipulated to suggest premeditation. The edits were sophisticated, convincing enough to fool casual viewers, damning enough to destroy his reputation completely. Headlines screamed about grifters targeting wealthy families, about child exploitation, about elaborate cons that preyed on the sympathies of the upper class. Constance made calls through the night, her voice sharp with fury as she mobilized lawyers and public relations specialists. But damage control could not erase stories already spreading through social media like wildfire. The narrative was loose, feeding on itself, growing larger with each retelling. Morning brought police to Harrington Tower with a warrant. They were professional, almost apologetic, but unyielding in their purpose. Clinton Archibald was under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. Bridget screamed when officers gently but firmly separated them, her small hands clinging to her father's shirt with desperate strength. The sound cut through Constance like a blade, sharp and terrible, a child's terror-given voice. Clinton's face was pale but composed, his focus entirely on his daughter, even as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. It's okay, sweetheart. It's going to be okay. Miss Constance will take care of you. Be good. Be brave. I love you. Daddy didn't do anything. Bridget's voice cracked with tears streaming down her face. Why won't anyone believe us? The officers led Clinton away, and Constance felt rage unlike anything she had known. This was injustice, naked and deliberate. This was Silas tying up loose ends, eliminating threats, using the legal system as a weapon against people who had done nothing except be in the wrong place when a child's curiosity intersected with corporate conspiracy. She called her lawyers, demanded bail, used every ounce of influence to keep Clinton from being processed like a common criminal. But the damage was done. The media had their narrative. The public had their villain. The single father and his trained daughter conning the wealthy had become the story that confirmed biases about class and desperation. That night, Bridget sat on the floor of Constance's office, her face blotchy from crying, her laptop open on her knees. It was her mother's old computer, battered but functional, filled with programs Astrid had installed when she worked as a data analyst before Bridget was born. Her voice was steady, despite tears that had not fully stopped. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to find proof. Constance knelt beside her, recognizing determination that would not be dissuaded. Bridget, you're 8 years old. This isn't— Yes, it is, Bridget interrupted, fierce and certain. My daddy is in trouble because of me, because I opened that safe, so I have to make it right. Constance saw herself in this child's eyes. The same refusal to accept defeat. The same inability to walk away from problems that needed solving. The same belief that intelligence and effort could overcome any obstacle. She made a decision that would have horrified her risk-averse lawyers. Then let me help you. For the next 12 hours, they worked together. Bridget's fingers flew across the keyboard using techniques her mother had taught her years ago, enhanced by her own intuitive understanding of systems. She traced the edited video footage back to its source, finding digital fingerprints that led to a server farm on the city's edge. Constance provided access credentials, open doors that would have taken Bridget weeks to penetrate alone. She watched this 8-year-old girl hack through firewalls with patient determination, finding layer after layer of hidden files. And they're buried in encrypted folders that required both of them working in tandem to unlock. They found everything. Silas Dermot's embezzlement scheme, years in the making. His plans to frame Constance, to seize control of the company, to eliminate anyone who threatened his carefully constructed empire of lies. Communications with rival companies offering to sell Harrington's secrets. Financial records showing theft that totaled hundreds of millions. Years of corruption laid bare in spreadsheets and emails, arrogance captured in his own words. Bridget saved every file, backed them up in multiple locations, her young face set with grim satisfaction. Constance felt something shift in her chest. This child, this brilliant girl who had accidentally stumbled into corporate conspiracy, had just saved the company her family had built over 3 generations. But more than that, she had shown Constance what trust looked like when given freely, what partnership meant when built on mutual respect rather than calculated advantage. Dawn broke over the city, pale winter light, touching windows with gold. Constance and Bridget sat together, surrounded by evidence, exhausted and triumphant. 2 people separated by age and circumstance, who had somehow become allies in a war neither had chosen, but both refused to lose. Constance reached over and squeezed Bridget's small hand. You did it. You brilliant, remarkable girl. You did it. Bridget's response was quiet, already thinking ahead to next steps. Now we have to save my dad. Flynn arrived at dawn with physical evidence to match Bridget's digital findings. Security footage from backup systems Silas had not known existed, showing him accessing Constance's office multiple times over the past month. Financial records obtained through channels Flynn would not name, proving embezzlement schemes that stretched back 5 years. Bank statements showing shell corporations funneling money into offshore accounts that registered to aliases that all traced back to one man. The emergency shareholders meeting was called for 10 o'clock. Constance spent the intervening hours preparing her presentation with the precision of someone who understood that this moment would define her tenure as CEO. Either she would emerge with her authority intact and her company secure, or she would be destroyed by the very conspiracy she was trying to expose. William Harrington sat at the head of the conference table when board members began filing in at 9:45. His face was carved from granite, revealing nothing of what he thought or felt. He had built this company through ruthlessness disguised as business acumen, and he would not let it fall to internal rot without exacting revenge that would be remembered for generations. Silas Dermott arrived at 9:52 confident in his tailored suit and practiced smile. He had orchestrated Clinton's arrest, planted evidence that would tie the single father to corporate espionage, created a narrative so compelling that even experienced investigators believed it. The child and her father were neutralized. Constance would be too busy managing scandal to notice the final pieces of his plan falling into place. He walked into the boardroom expecting sympathy and support. Instead, he found eyes that tracked him with the cold assessment of predators recognizing prey. Board members filled seats around the massive table. 12 men and 3 women, each representing billions in invested capital, each possessing enough influence to move markets with casual conversations. They had gathered on short notice because Constance Harrington had invoked emergency protocols, something she had never done in 3 years as CEO. Constance entered, last Bridget at her side. The child's presence violated every protocol, but no one objected. Something in Constance's expression suggested that objections would be unwelcome and unwise. She moved to the head of the table opposite her father, tablet in hand, her face showing the exhaustion of sleepless nights and the cold fury of someone who had been betrayed by a trusted colleague. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of absolute certainty. We have discovered a conspiracy, a plot to steal from this company, to frame innocent people, and to seize control through deception that relied on our trust and our complacency. The presentation began with financial documents appearing on the screen behind her. Transactions that looked legitimate at first glance, but revealed their true nature under scrutiny. Money flowing out of Harrington Industries through approved channels, then disappearing into shell corporations that existed only on paper. Reappearing in offshore accounts. Converted to assets that could not be traced without expertise most auditors did not possess. Silas's face cycled through emotions faster than he could control. Confidence crumbled into confusion, confusion hardened into fear, fear sharpened into desperate calculation. He needed to stop this presentation before it destroyed him completely. His voice emerged too loud, too defensive. This is fabricated. The child hacked those files. They're not admissible in any legal proceeding. You're basing accusations on evidence obtained through illegal means by an 8-year-old who already proved she can bypass our security. Constance's smile held no warmth. I anticipated that argument. The door opened. Flynn entered with a folder thick with papers, each page marked with official seals and signatures. He placed it on the table in front of William Harrington, who opened it and began reading with his face revealing nothing. Flynn's voice was professional, devoid of emotion. Original documents, subpoenaed legally through channels I established 6 months ago while investigating shell corporations for another client. Every transaction verified by forensic accountants from 3 independent firms. Every email authenticated by digital forensic experts with credentials that would withstand any legal challenge. Video footage began playing on the screen. Silas entering Constance's office at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks earlier. Approaching the safe, running his hands over the interface, photographing it with his tablet. The timestamp was clean, unedited, pulled from backup systems designed to capture what primary systems missed. More footage showed him in the server room uploading code that would allow him to edit primary security feeds. In the financial department, after hours accessing files he had no authorization to view. The evidence accumulated like snowfall, silent and relentless and impossible to deny. Bridget's small voice cut through the tension, clear and precise. I didn't hack to get the evidence. I hacked to find out where to look. Then the grown-ups got real proof the legal way. I just helped connect the dots. Board members exchanged glances. Some of them had children. Some had grandchildren. They recognized brilliance when they saw it, even when it came in a package society taught them to underestimate. Email threads appeared on screen, Silas's words condemning him in language he had never intended anyone else to read. Offers to sell proprietary technology to competitors. Plans to plant documents that would make Constance appear complicit in fraud she had not committed. Contingencies for eliminating anyone who discovered his scheme. The final email made several board members audibly gasp. Silas had communicated with a rival corporation offering to deliver complete access to Harrington's financial systems for $50 million in a position as their chief financial officer. He had been preparing to betray everything, take his stolen fortune, and walk away while the company collapsed under manufactured scandal. Constance let the evidence speak for itself, her presentation methodical and devastating. When she finished, silence filled the boardroom with pressure that felt physical. William Harrington stood slowly, his pale eyes fixed on Silas Dermott with an intensity that made younger executives look away. For a long moment, he said nothing, letting his gaze alone deliver judgment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. That made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Call the police. Mr. Dermott will be staying until they arrive." Silas tried to run. Desperation overrode what remained of his reason. He lunged toward the door, but security guards were already there, positioned by Flynn, who had anticipated exactly this response. They caught him before he reached the hallway. His screamed protests echoed through the building as they secured his hands, his carefully constructed persona shattering into something raw and ugly. The words poured out of him in a torrent of rage and self-pity, the classic monologue of someone who believed their brilliance entitled them to everything they could take. "I deserve this company. I built half these systems." Constance inherited her position because of a name, because of bloodline, while I worked for everything and got nothing but a salary. You all knew it. You all saw that she was too young, too soft, too female to run an empire. I was going to save this company from her incompetence. William Harrington's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. "My daughter tripled our stock price and doubled our revenue in 3 years. You stole from us and blamed others for your crimes. There is no comparison between competence and corruption, regardless of how you rationalize your choices." Police arrived with the efficiency of people who had been briefed on what they would find. They read Silas his rights with professional courtesy that made his continued protests seem pathetic rather than frightening. He was still screaming about injustice as they led him to the elevator, his voice fading as the doors closed on a career that had ended in handcuffs and humiliation. The boardroom emptied slowly, members filing out in clusters, already calculating how this would affect stock prices and public perception. Damage control would begin immediately. Press releases were being drafted before they reached their cars. Clinton walked in through the door Silas had failed to reach, released on bail that Constance had guaranteed with her personal fortune. His wrists still bore red marks from handcuffs removed 20 minutes earlier. He crossed the room to his daughter, and Bridget ran to him with relief and joy, transforming her face into something radiant. The board members who remained saw the truth in how they looked at each other. This was not a con artist and his trained accomplice. This was a father and daughter who loved each other with the kind of purity that wealth could not purchase or influence corrupt. William Harrington watched the reunion with an expression that slowly shifted from cold assessment to something resembling human warmth. He approached Clinton, who straightened defensively, expecting continued suspicion or demands. Instead, William extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, about your intentions, about your character, about the kind of man you are." Clinton took the offered hand, his voice steady despite the emotions churning through him. "My name is Clinton, and yes, you were wrong." The simple correction held more dignity than elaborate speeches. William's grip tightened slightly, acknowledgement and apology compressed into a handshake that lasted 3 seconds longer than professional courtesy required. Constance stood near the window, watching snow begin to fall over the city. The crisis had passed. The company was secure. Justice had been served with efficiency that felt almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the past days. But she felt empty rather than triumphant. Victory without someone to share it with was just another form of loneliness. 3 days passed in bureaucratic cleanup. Lawyers filed motions, prosecutors built cases, media outlets shifted their narratives from con artist targets wealthy family to CFO's betrayal exposed by unlikely heroes. Clinton's reputation was restored through press conferences and official statements, though the damage to his pride would take longer to heal. Bridget returned to school where her teachers struggled to reconcile the child who solved puzzles quietly with the girl who had cracked military-grade security and exposed corporate conspiracy. Mrs. Peterson requested a meeting with Clinton to discuss advanced placement options, her tone suggesting that standard curriculum was no longer appropriate. Constance returned to running her company board meetings and strategic planning, filling hours that felt longer now that the penthouse was empty again. She had grown accustomed to Clinton's cooking, filling the space with warmth, to Bridget's questions about security systems and coding languages, to feeling like her home was inhabited rather than just occupied. On a Saturday morning, she found herself at the diner where Clinton had picked up shifts between catering gigs. The bell chimed when she entered, drawing attention from the few early customers who recognized the CEO of Harrington Industries standing in a place that served coffee for $2 and breakfast for $6. Clinton was wiping down tables, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up when the bell chimed, surprise crossing his face when he saw her standing there in jeans and a sweater, looking entirely out of place among vinyl booths and laminated menus. She felt suddenly uncertain words that had always come easily in boardrooms, now eluding her completely. "Hi, can we talk?" They sat in a corner booth. Constance wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee she did not want, searching for courage she had never needed in business but desperately required now. The words emerged slowly, carefully placed. "That day at the party, what I said to you, it was cruel. I used you to make a point. I never meant—" Clinton's voice was gentle, understanding she had not earned but received anyway. "I know. You were defending me in your way. Badly, but with good intentions. I defended you badly and put you in danger and nearly destroyed your life. Silas put me in danger. You saved me. You and Bridget together." The door chimed again. Bridget ran in her backpack, bouncing, launching herself at Constance with the unself-conscious affection of a child who had decided someone was worth loving. She hugged tight her small arms, fierce with joy. "Miss Constance, did you come to see us? Are you staying for lunch?" Constance hugged her back, feeling the small warmth of this child who had changed everything. The brilliance that had exposed corruption. The love that had reminded her what actually mattered. Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Actually, Bridget, I came to ask you something." Bridget pulled back, curious and intent. "What?" The proposal emerged without the polish Constance usually brought to important moments. No prepared speeches, no calculated strategy, just honesty that felt terrifying and necessary. "Would you like to have a mother again? I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But these past weeks, having you both in my home, I realized how empty it had been before, how empty I had been. And I thought maybe if you were willing, we could build something together, a family, a real one." Clinton stared at her, shock and hope warring on his face. "Constance, are you—" "I'm proposing, badly I know, without a ring or planning or any of the romantic gestures people usually have. But I'm proposing because I meant it that day, even though I say it as a joke. I just didn't realize I meant it until you opened something much more valuable than a safe." Bridget's eyes were bright with understanding beyond her years. "What did we open, Britta?" "My heart," Constance said simply. She looked at Clinton, her pale blue eyes vulnerable in a way they had never been in boardrooms or negotiations. "So, yes, I'm proposing. Will you marry me, both of you?" Clinton reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. His voice was thick with emotion, barely contained. "On one condition. You remember that marriage is a partnership. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong all the time. You just have to be honest. Can you do that?" Constance felt tears on her face and did not care who saw them. "I can try, Bo." The wedding took place 3 months later on a Saturday morning when fresh snow made the world clean and new. They married in a small chapel, not the cathedral William had suggested, with only close friends and family present. Bridget stood beside them as junior bridesmaid, her dress the same shade of blue as her eyes, her smile wide enough to crack her face. She had helped plan everything her opinion sought and valued because this wedding was about building a family, not impressing society. Clinton wore a simple suit that made him look more handsome than any man in expensive tailoring. His hands were steady when he took Constance's, his eyes warm with love that had grown from unlikely beginnings into something that felt inevitable. Constance wore a dress of winter white, simple and elegant, with her mother's pearls at her throat. When she walked down the aisle, she walked alone, having politely declined her father's offer to give her away. She was not being given. She was choosing. The distinction mattered more than tradition. The vows were traditional in structure, but felt revolutionary when spoken by a CEO and a single father who had found each other across a divide that should have been impossible to cross. Clinton slipped the ring onto Constance's finger, his voice steady and sure. "Safes can be opened. Locks can be picked. Codes can be broken, but hearts open only when they choose to. Thank you for choosing to open yours. I promise to guard it better than any security system ever could. Constance's response came with tears she had learned to accept as strength rather than weakness. I promise to trust you, even when it's scary, even when it goes against every instinct I've learned, because you taught me that trust isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of everything real. William Harrington sat in the front pew, and his face was wet, though he would later claim allergies. He had built an empire but nearly lost his daughter to the same emotional isolation that had defined his life after Eleanor's death. Watching her choose vulnerability over control, love over power, felt like witnessing a redemption he had not known he needed. After the ceremony, he pulled Clinton aside in the chapel's small garden, where winter roses bloomed despite the cold. His arms opened without words, and Clinton accepted the embrace with surprise that softened into understanding. William's voice was gruff with emotion he had spent decades suppressing. "Welcome to the family. Take care of my girls." The reception was small and warm, held in the penthouse that was now their shared home. Flynn Corbin gave a toast that made everyone laugh, stories about Clinton's early security work delivered with the timing of someone who understood that humor healed better than the sentiment. Bridget gave a speech that reduced half the room to tears, talking about how she had always wanted a mother, and now she had the coolest one in the world. Her joy was infectious, spreading through the gathered guests like light through crystal. Clinton danced with his daughter, then with his wife, and Constance discovered that being held was not a sign of weakness, but of belonging. She had spent 33 years armoring herself against a world that had taught her to trust no one. Now she was learning to lower those defenses, to let someone see her completely, to believe that she could be loved for who she was rather than what she possessed. 6 months later, Clinton returned to security work, this time as Director of Corporate Security for Harrington Industries, a position created specifically for him that combined his expertise with his values. He transformed their systems, making them more secure and more humane, training his staff to see security as protection rather than control. He implemented protocols that respected privacy while maintaining safety design systems that caught actual threats without treating every employee like a potential criminal. The other executives had been skeptical until breach attempts decreased by 40% in the first quarter. Results spoke louder than tradition. Constance learned to leave work at reasonable hours to have dinner with her family, to build a life that included more than quarterly earnings reports. She discovered that power shared was not power diminished, but power multiplied, that bringing Clinton's perspective into strategic decisions made her a better leader. The board noticed. Stock prices continued climbing. Employee satisfaction increased. The company thrived under leadership that valued competence over pedigree, results over politics, humanity over pure profit maximization. Bridget entered a gifted program for young technologists where her talents were nurtured rather than feared. She won awards for code she had written, gave presentations at conferences where adults listened with the respect usually reserved for experienced professionals. Her teachers stopped trying to contain her brilliance and instead found ways to challenge it. But she came home every night to a family that loved her unconditionally, to parents who valued her happiness more than her achievements, to a home where she could be brilliant and ordinary in equal measure. On their first anniversary, they walked through Central Park as snow began to fall. Bridget ran ahead, catching flakes on her tongue, her laughter carrying across winter silence. Clinton and Constance walked hand in hand, their breath visible in cold air, their hearts warm with contentment neither had expected to find. Clinton's voice held gentle teasing. "Do you regret it, marrying down as your social circle would say?" Constance stopped walking and turned to face him, her hands finding his face cold against his warm skin. "I married exactly who I needed to marry. Someone who sees me. Not my money, not my name, not my power, just me. Just you is pretty spectacular." He kissed her while snow fell around them like benediction, and for a moment the world was perfect. Simple. Complete. Bridget ran back to them, grabbing both their hands, forming a chain. "Come on, let's go home." And they did. Three people who had been broken and lost and alone, now walking together toward a future none of them could have imagined that night, when a careless joke became an impossible promise that came true. Home was no longer a building or an address. Home was this, holding hands in the snow, trusting each other to catch you when you fell, knowing that the most valuable things in life could never be locked in a safe because they lived in the space between heartbeats, in the choice to be vulnerable, in the radical act of opening yourself to another person. The snow fell heavier, covering their footprints almost as quickly as they made them. But it did not matter. They knew the way. Later that evening, back in the penthouse with wet coats hanging by the door and hot chocolate warming their hands, Bridget opened an envelope that had arrived that morning. She read it twice, her eyes widening before looking up at her parents with an expression that combined disbelief and pride. Constance noticed first. "What is it, sweetheart?" Bridget held up the letter, her voice almost reverent. "MIT. They have an early admission program for exceptional students. Someone nominated me. They want me to attend specialized summer courses starting when I'm 12. Clinton's heart swelled with pride and fear in equal measure. His daughter was growing up, growing into brilliance that would take her places he could not follow. But she would go with love as her foundation, with family to return to, with the knowledge that achievement mattered less than character. Constance pulled Bridget into a hug that spoke of support and understanding. She knew what it meant to be young and brilliant and female in a world that did not always know what to do with that combination. "We'll figure it out together," she promised. "Whatever you choose will support you." The evening settled into comfortable routine. Bridget doing homework at the kitchen table while Clinton cooked dinner. Constance reviewing documents for tomorrow's meeting while keeping one ear on the conversation happening around her. Normal moments that had become extraordinary through the simple fact of being shared. Later, after Bridget was asleep, Clinton and Constance stood at the window, watching the city that had brought them together in the most unlikely way. His voice was soft, thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about that night. What if Bridget hadn't been curious? What if you hadn't made that joke? What if any one of 100 small things had gone differently?" Constance leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Then we would have found each other some other way. Some things are inevitable, even when they seem impossible." Outside, the snow continued falling, transforming New Haven into something magical. Inside, a family created from broken pieces and unlikely connections settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had found what mattered most. Not wealth, not power, not success measured in quarterly reports, but this: love freely given, trust hard earned, a future built on foundations stronger than any safe, more valuable than any fortune. They had opened more than a vault that night. They had opened possibilities. And in doing so, they had discovered that the impossible was just another word for something that had not happened yet.